Hello, this is the chapter reading of An Unexpected Bonding by Lilly Rayman. Prologue. The diaphanous fabric that clung to her waif-like form did little to negate the coldness of the cavernous chamber. The darkness enveloped her like a frozen blanket of oppression. With a suppressed shudder, she continued blindly on towards her destination. There was a consistent dripping of water as it fell from unseen stalactites to break the surface of the hidden pool of water within the light-starved cavern. The single sound reminded her this was not the frozen nothingness of death. A voice reached out to her like water trickling over a pebbly creek bed. "Sister, I'm so glad you could join me." Stopping at the sound, she peered into the darkness, trying to find the source of the voice. "I take it you have seen the same as I." Her own voice was almost a hiss of breathless air as she spoke to the unseen presence of her sister. "Indeed I have. We have much to discuss if we are to set in motion the events of the future." With a final shout of pain, she collapsed against the bed. There was but a moment's silence before the newborn's first cries were heard. Her child was offered to her, but before she took the crying, mucus-covered babe, she froze. "It's human," she sneered, holding her hands up as if to ward off the child. Her mother rested a hand upon her exhausted shoulder. "It would appear so, my dear. Is that a problem?" Her voice was filled with thoughtful calculation as she observed the screaming babe. "Get it away from me! I will have nothing to do with such an abomination." Despite the exhaustion of childbirth, she spat the words with vehemence. Like poison from a snake, turning her back on the infant. "But daughter, it is your child. Are you sure you do not wish to raise your own child?" Her voice was calm, with little protest, as if the behavior of her daughter was expected. "I do not care what you do with that thing. Just take it away from me." "Very well, my daughter, I will dispose of the babe for you." With great care, the older woman took the crying child from the nervous birthing attendant. Unseen by her exhausted but furious daughter, she gazed down at her grandchild, seeing the destiny of the infant in its aura before smiling sadly. She would prefer to see the child raised with them, but the destiny mapped out within her vision bespoke of a harder childhood than she could provide. She stepped away, removing the human baby from the birthing chamber. It was heart-wrenching to watch for the second time in a millennium. As he watched his beloved wife take her last shaking breath, he was filled with the memories of the life they had shared together. Bittersweet memories passed between them as she fell into her final resting sleep. With an almost trembling hand, he gently brushed a brittle white lock of hair from her wrinkled face. There was small comfort to be had that it was an easy, pain-free death. A tear threatened as he gazed at the soft yet heavily creased skin of his wife. Time may have taken its toll on the external beauty of his mortal lover's body, but he still remembered clearly in his mind her beauty when they first met 68 years ago. He stood up from her deathbed, casting her one last look as he quietly left the private hospice room, searching for someone to inform them of the inevitable sad demise of his cherished grandmother. It was the first full moon of winter. The air was crisp with the coming chill, indicating the arrival of winter. The pale bark of the tall trees glowed in the moonlight, disappearing high in the dying autumnal leaves. Around her were the newly shifted forms of her peers, the young pack members who had turned 15 since the last first full winter moon. Looks of pity were sent her way as she sat upon the mulched leaf litter of the forest floor, a shivering, naked human form bathed in moonlight. Shame stung at her cheeks as she sat shaking with the early winter chill, awaiting the emergence of her inner wolf. Yet, despite the burning shame that there was no wolf to welcome into the pack, she was not surprised. After all, her mother was only human, nothing any more special than a warm heart and a kind smile. There had always been a secret hope and a whispered thought throughout the pack that the strength of her father's wolf would be enough to share with her a wolf spirit. Yet it seemed she was destined to be like her dearly departed mother, human. Chapter 1. The peace and tranquility of the sunlit forest dell was disturbed when a fierce wind whipped through it. The fresh fallen leaves of autumn lifted from the mulch-blanketed floor in a swirl of golds, reds, and burnished coppers. A burst of iridescent color erupted from the deep red and white toadstools as fiercely chattering pixies, woken from their slumber, took wing. The appearance of their queen silenced their admonished tones. The dell once more fell silent as the fairy queen glided about in deep contemplation. The leaves swirled about the gossamer folds of her gown as it slipped about her slender ankles, until her motion halted, and the queen took on the stilled presence of the ancient trees that guarded her magical realm. Her gown trembled upon the wind, as did the leaves adorning the ancient trees. The passage of time was marked by the changes of light, and the forest took on an amber hue as the sun journeyed to its nighttime home. Amber flashed to purple as the sun disappeared, yet still the fairy queen moved not. The tiny little night fairies took wing, lighting the night with their bright auras as they flitted about the forest, their passage marked by the pinprick light of their magic. They danced around the darkening dell, daring to dive and twirl around their queen. Their antics disturbed the vision-filled trance she found herself held in. Her stony face broke with a smile as she laughed at the silent display of light about her. Lifting a hand before her, she watched as one of the darting lights came towards her, settling upon her finger. "It's good to find you so calm, my love. It is a rare sight indeed these days." The deep voice broke the silence of the dell, sending the dancing lights into a frenzy as they darted about until they settled upon the lower limbs of the towering trees. Their magic allowed a gentle illumination to settle upon the tall masculine fairy king as he stepped out from the darkness. His queen spun with a whipping of wind to face him, stilling the moment her eyes alighted upon him. Even after the eternity they had spent together, he still elicited a strength of emotions within her that time had not faded. If anything, they grew stronger with every passing millennium. Her gray eyes darted over his warrior's frame. The woven silk of his attire clung against his lean form. The earthen tones represented his very nature to the world. He stepped lightly towards her, the blanket of forest mulch undisturbed by his passing. His hand lifted to brush across her cheek, pushing aside the flowing locks of her hair as his fingers curled around her nape. His hazel eyes spoke volumes of his love as they locked with her own. He dipped his head towards her, his strong mouth settling over her own soft one as he pressed his love upon her with his kiss. She exhaled a shaky breath. The breeze swirled around them, lifting the full and flowing locks of his black hair, tickling it against her silken skin. She pushed against his chest, dropping her face, resting her forehead against his strong chin. "It is time. The pieces are coming together upon the board. The final moves are waiting to be played." Her hushed voice whispered on the wind. "Are you ready to go to the mortal realm then, my queen?" "Damn those blasted wolves," snarled Imhotep, dragging his hand through his normally perfectly styled hair. In pure frustration, he stormed into the quiet office. Hather carefully put down her pen and closed the file she had been studying. What have they done now? A small amount of resignation behind her words. She was over the whole bloody mess. For centuries, wolves and vampires had been clashing with each other. The bloodiest diet and deadliest battles had since died down as their presence in the mortal realm faded, but still the hatred existed and skirmishes occurred. They have been seen by humans running around the big-ass, hairy mother... She stopped him from completing his curse with the sharp raising of a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. He cleared his throat. They have been running through the forest as wolves, deliberately being seen by locals. They have scared most people away. He collapsed into the chair, placed parallel with precision before the desk. Hather observed him carefully, noting the paleness to his almost hollow cheeks. He hadn't fed for a while. So now you have found your hunting ground decidedly empty. Would you care to help yourself from the bar fridge over there? She gestured with her hand. He stood, moving across the Egyptian spun carpet towards the fridge. I may find it more pleasant talking to you when you are not so tetchy from a lack of blood. I really do not understand why you persist in getting blood the old-fashioned way. Heather's exasperated words were thinly veiled with a nonchalance she did not feel. The microwave pinged. With the opening of the door, the delicious aroma of blood tickled her nostrils. You know I don't hurt anyone, Hather. It's just after centuries of having women fall into my arms, it seems so impersonal to... At a loss for words, he waved the mug in his hand around before putting it to his mouth to taste. Plus, I never get it to the right temperature, always too hot or too cold. I guess I'm set in my ancient ways. His nose screwed up in distaste, reminding Hather of a child told to eat their greens. With a soft chuckle, Hather shook her head, the beads on the ends of her braids rolling back and forth across her neck. Even after all these centuries, the action still brought her a sense of calm. Well, my old friend, I have been working through a proposal that may work to bring an end to the war. I am preparing to approach the council this evening. Imhotep drained the contents of the mug with distaste before he stood. Well, my old friend, I know you well enough to acknowledge the dismissal in your words. I look forward to hearing all about your success afterwards. With an exaggerated bow, he swept out of the office as swiftly as he'd entered. Shaking her head, she reopened the file before picking up her pen once more. The bartender placed the frosty bottle on the oak bar before her. With the tool of his trade, he flipped the lid off. She watched the escaping mist curl from the neck of the bottle as a small dish of lime wedges was offered to her. Picking a wedge, she ran it over the edge of the bottle rim before pushing it into the neck. Beer frothed up around the lime wedge as the bottle was raised to her lips, allowing the icy beverage to slip down her throat. Cheers, Murph, she saluted the bartender with the bottle before resting it back on the bar. A short, rough-nailed finger traced patterns in the droplets of moisture forming on the cold glass of the bottle. Absently, she turned back to the TV above the bar, taking little notice of the cowboy being tossed from a bucking bull. Her attention was instead towards the new presence at her side. Cold one off tap, thanks, Murph. And Livy's next drink on my tab too, please. She twisted on the bar stool to face the man at her side. Thanks for the drink, Walt. To what do I owe the pleasure? She smiled at him, knowing he could see that it failed to reach her deep brown eyes. With a callous finger, he pushed the brim of his stained cream Stetson up, bringing his warm eyes out of the shadow of his hat. A simple gesture of friendship, Liv. He drawled in his heavy Texan accent. I was wondering how those latest bowls of yours were coming along. Always straight to business, she thought, as she took another pull of her beer. Murph placed the frosty glass next to Walt. They're coming along nicely, Walt. Nate would be proud of me if he could see them now. They'll be ready in plenty of time for your ride next month. Give even your best riders a run for their money. Walt drained half his beer. A sad smile pulled at the corner of his generous mouth. Nate always did breed the fiercest bulls for the circuit. Not many could be beaten in 8 seconds. I'm glad you took an interest in his business, Livy. Would have been a shame to lose the bloodline. I'll come out on the weekend and see how my investment is going." Livy nodded as he finished his beer, standing up from where he rested his hip against the bar. He nodded towards her as he pulled his hat back down, calling out to Murph as he left the bar. Livy watched his Levi-clad form as he disappeared into the bright daylight outside the dim bar, before draining the last of her own drink. Bittersweet memories overwhelmed her. It's where she had first met Nate, not long after leaving the pack's sprawling estate in New Hampshire. She had needed to get away from the oppression that seemed to follow her there. There hadn't been any other members of the pack without a wolf. She was the only one who had never shifted. The pack respected her well enough. After all, she was the youngest child of their beloved Alpha. He was a proud and strong pack leader, but he also had a deep-rooted, caring nature. Her mother had been human, a second wife for him. His first wife had been his true bonded mate, but she had been killed during a skirmish with vampires years ago. The pack had accepted her mother well enough, and, in turn, Livy. After all, it was her mother's warm smile and caring nature that had lifted her father out of his depression that had almost destroyed the pack. But after Livy's mother had died of cancer, it had been hard to be the only wolfless member of the pack. Her father seemed to understand and was happy enough to allow her a break away to road trip around America, on the understanding she stayed clear of all known vampire locations. Eventually, Livy arrived at this bar deep in the heart of Texas. Nate was the first person to catch her eye in the crowded bar. The small sting of a forming tear was quickly brushed away. Before she could return to her silent memories, a sharp smell caught her nose, making her breath hitch. Vampire. Thank you.